And I'll go ahead and let folks in from the waiting room. Good morning, everyone. I believe folks are being let in from the waiting room. We'll keep letting folks come in for the next minute or so, but I'm Dana Kuhnline from ReImagine Appalachia. I'll be your flight attendant for today, walking you all through the agenda just to make sure we're all on the same plane, going to the destination that we are hopeful for. You'll see that it is the local government resources regarding data centers. So this is our third webinar in a series we've been doing this year, going through some answering community questions about data centers and that larger question of how can responsible development happen as part of data centers? How can this new industry that's coming into the region at full speed, not recreate some of the mistakes we've seen in the past around development in the region. It's being shared in the chat, but just worth saying it out loud. If you'd like to enable closed captioning, that is available, including translated closed captioning. If English is not your easiest language, then that is an option for attendees. If you have any questions with that, just say it in the chat, and Liam can help get you set up with closed captions. This event will also be recorded. And then after the event, we share the recording and all the slide decks from the speakers, as well as the links from the chat to all the people who are registered. If you have registered with an incorrect email, you will not get that email. So I can't help you with that, but otherwise, we do our best. So like I said, this is part of a series. Our event next month is going to be talking about some of the construction employment that it comes from data centers and how we can try and ensure that employment are good jobs, and that they have project labor agreement attached. And project labor agreements, also known as PLAs, are a set of standard agreements that can be attached to construction and to ensure that the jobs are good jobs, that there are pathways to employment through apprenticeships and other on-the-job training, et cetera. So we'll be talking more about that aspect in June. Today, as noted, we're going to be focused on some of the mechanisms for local governments, as well as people who are members of communities who are active and influencing their local government can use to get more of a seat at the table when it comes to data center construction or data center proposals. And what some of the questions folks should be asking. So speaking of questions we're asking, we do have a short poll for you all just at the start. So if you've never done one of these Minty polls before, it must be your first ReImagine call. We love these polls. You can use the link that Liam just dropped in the chat, or if you would prefer, you can use the QR code in the side, and that will just let your answers show up on the screen. So if you can ask questions in the chat the whole time. You do not have to put your questions on the screen for them to be answered. But we do, I think it's nice for the speakers and for the room to get a sense of some of the questions, and then we'll have the speakers present. And then from 1 to 1:30, we do have, we'll stay on the line for folks who want to stay, and we'll have additional time for Q&A for anybody who's interested in that. So this is an hour and a half webinar, but the vast majority of the content is going to come in the second part, or in the first part, the first hour. This is very cute, the just learning, so that's fine. um, so here's a few more. Now, yeah, it's like so specific. Solid waste disposal, um, utility, compare the cost can. Yeah. Building coalitions and leveraging needs for workforce and other benefits. That's definitely something some of our speakers can speak to. Where are the responsible models being built? That's a fantastic question. I think everybody's always so eager to see, okay, who's doing it? Show me what's happening, where it's happening. Non-negotiable models requiring labor agreements. There are models requiring labor agreements. We can definitely get into that both on this webinar and on our June webinar. Drinking water. Great.
Did you
Um,
put the link to the Mentee in the
oh,
chat? Because I
I
haven't gotten it yet.
okay. Liam just bumped it up. Thank you for asking. So hopefully it shows up there. If it doesn't show up for you, you can't make it work, just drop your question in the chat. That's fine too. That also works. And just so you know, we'll share these questions out with the group when we do the follow-up email. Um, every project is a little different. Best case studies, what's our leverage? So you guys are in luck because so many of these questions are things that our speakers are going to be addressing. So just as we're waiting for giving you all a few more minutes to drop those questions in, I am going to just say a little bit about our speakers and then I'll hand it over to Megan to get us started. Just a little background. Policy in our nation has been slow to catch up to the data center boom. However, we have many advocates that are working to create guidance that help our communities get up to speed. I've been tracking a lot of this guidance and materials for a couple months now, and Meagan, Jeremy, and Christina's organization have some of the most useful tools that I've seen. So I'm really excited that they were able to join us. All of them deserve a full hour. They each get 10 minutes or so. And so they're going to kind of speed through what they have. And like I said, we will have that extra cushion at the end for extra questions because I know we're going to be presenting more material without the time that it deserves for all the rich and incredible resources that our speakers have created for communities. So I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Megan. I'm going to stop this share, but this question, it actually will stay open. So if you didn't get a chance to fill out your question, you can still go ahead and do that, and it'll show up, and it'll show up in the records for the call. Um, but yeah, Megan. And yeah, just a quick note from Liam. We love it when folks introduce themselves in the chat. So please feel free to share us who you're with, where you're joining us from, any special questions you might have. Drop that in the chat, and then yeah, I'll hand it over to Megan.
Awesome, thanks. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Meagan Niebler. I am with Fairshake Environmental Legal Services, based out of Pittsburgh, but we work across kind of the Ohio River Valley in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. And it's not really a joke anymore, but I keep saying like before October of last year, I literally had never said the word data center in my life. And now it's about like 99% of my daily words in work mode are data centers. And so I'm always really excited to be talking with folks who are thinking about how can we help upriver? How can we put in some kind of protections to make sure our community's voice are really centered in decisions that are made about where they live, work, and play and the areas that they love. Um, I work with lots of attorneys, and so I always have to include this lovely legal disclaimer. The information I'm going to share today is legal education. I am not an attorney. I do not have any legal training, but hopefully this can provide some good overviews and foundations for you to really think about what would work in your communities. So for those of you who don't know us at Fair Shake, we are an environmental law and justice nonprofit. Really, all of our work centers on making sure that residents' voice, ideas, concerns are really driving the decisions that impact their communities. So we do provide no cost and low cost legal representation to communities, to grassroots groups, to nonprofits. We provide community democracy work to help communities find legal or technical or organizing levers that they can pull. And then we also do a lot of legal education, internships, and training for the next generation of incredible attorneys and policy folks. Really excited that on Monday, we will be sharing and launching our data center decision tree for communities. This is going to be a visual roadmap to help communities figure out like what can we do if we hear about a data center or want stronger laws. How can we try our hardest to stop it? And how can we mitigate harm from it? Really walking through the specifics. I know someone mentioned earlier, like each one is very specific and unique. So it really takes that into consideration as well as state laws. You probably follow us on social media or share your email in the chat, and I'll put you on the email list for that. We'll then have an open house on the 18th, and we have our next pro bono legal clinic on a couple weeks on June 4th. So really excited about the tool. I saw a lot of questions that in the Menti that hopefully it can help answer. Okay, that's on my my spiel, my fair shake spiel. So let's dive into kind of what we do and what municipalities can do to respond to a lot of community concerns. So since October, I have talked with probably over 100 different towns across our 3 states who were scrolling one night or who opened up a newspaper and read about a new data center coming to their community. And almost all of them do not want that data center there. A lot of the concerns that we hear are about things like, I bought this property because I loved the farmland and the vacant cornfields that were across the street from me, and those are going to go away. A lot of concerns about noise and vibration from folks living close by. A lot of concerns about air quality with diesel generators, and then a lot of concerns about utility costs and making sure that, folks' electric bills aren't spiking. Lots of other concerns, but those are a lot of the ones that we hear. And the good news is that municipalities do have a lot of powers to do something about it, right? To get in front of the problem as much as possible. There are a number of different ways that municipalities can do that. Kind of thinking about 5 different buckets of action. First is taking time, right? Although these things are coming into our area with a sense of urgency, municipalities can really remove that urgency and take the time they need to make sure they're making the right decisions for their communities. Transparency was one of the biggest frustrations we hear across the board from communities, regardless of if they want a data center or not want a data center. And so fostering transparency is an incredible opportunity for municipalities. When we think about decision-making powers, zoning is one of the biggest ones. And so thinking about zoning for municipalities is really, really, really important. As well as then enforcement and nuisance ordinances and making sure that if something is built, it will be a good neighbor on the back end and that municipalities have the power to hold them accountable to be a good neighbor. And then, like many people said, other options are making sure that your community really receives concrete, tangible benefits that are going to support community and community concerns in the future. So I'm going to dive into each of these to, again, just kind of lay a foundation. And then I'm excited to hear from Jeremy and Christina kind of get a lot more insight into some of these options, I'm sure. So when we think about taking the time we need, we know that a lot of communities in Ohio right now are passing moratoriums. In Pennsylvania, it's a slightly different process. I won't go into nuance there, but thinking about how can we give ourselves time as a municipality to get our local laws in place. So important then during that moratorium time to actually do something with that time, right? Kind of doing the assessments, making sure you're updating your laws so that if and when a data center comes, you are well prepared with what you want those laws to say. Also, really think it's a great time for municipalities to use their comprehensive plan, update their comprehensive plan, make sure that they are reading their comprehensive plan, and think critically, right? How will a data center impact or not impact the vision that was laid out in that comprehensive plan? So giving yourselves time to really think about things, stepping back from that sense of urgency and making sure that your laws and processes are in place to respond to those community concerns that are coming up. The second bucket is around transparency. The number of communities that have reached out to us with intense frustration about elected officials making decisions in the dark of night, behind closed doors, behind non-disclosure agreements is really, really high. And as always, communities and residents, we believe, should really be driving the decisions that are made about their communities. There are lots of ways that municipalities can do this. We've seen incredible models for public participation forums from across the country that can be part of official municipal processes for different types of development. We know that sharing information is critical, right? Making sure that residents have all the information so that they can make the best decisions and have the best questions and concerns and ideas to help with the decision around data centers. And so sharing that information freely is critical. And part of that is banning the use of non-disclosure agreements, which we've seen some examples of in some other municipalities. Lots of ways to increase transparency. These are some, and I'm sure there are lots of other great ones that municipalities are trying. And I'm excited to hear and learn more about those. There we go. Zoning. When we think about stamps of approval, Zoning is one of the biggest stamps of approval that a municipality has. Without strong zoning, they are really kind of ceding all of their decision-making power to the state permitting system, right? So most communities want to have a say. They want to have some decision-making power. And so updating and creating data center and power sourcing zoning ordinances is one of the best ways that municipalities can impact data centers. There are lots of different ways and lots of different provisions within that zoning that can really help. Definitely making sure that there's definitions, making sure that you're not permitting that use of data centers by right, but putting as conditional or special exception. There's all sorts of ideas that can be learned from Virginia counties and communities who have been dealing with data centers for a long time and are now updating their zoning codes to reflect the concerns and frustrations that they have felt. So making sure that things like community culture and strong nuisance protections are in place in there. We see other zoning that use kind of creative energy saving techniques as part of their zoning codes. A lot around utility requirements and assessments can be added into those zoning codes. Safety is a big one. And then in our 3 states, you can't really ban different types of developments for moving forward. And so to make sure that communities have a say, there are all sorts of different community impact analysis and assessments that can be put in place within zoning, as well as transparency pieces so that folks know what's going on before, during, and after a facility is approved or not approved. So all sorts of ways that zoning can be used to make sure that community concerns are centered for municipalities. We know that municipalities also have a lot of power in terms of nuisance ordinances. So nuisance are things like dust, debris, noise, vibration, heat in some instances. And making sure those nuisance ordinances are up to date and really incorporate the common issues that come up with data centers is really important, right? So if a data center is built and they exceed those nuisance levels, there is a process that can be enforced to make sure that that facility is being a good neighbor. So updating nuisance ordinances and then making sure that there's enforcement behind those ordinances is really critical and a good opportunity for municipalities. And then lastly, making sure that your community, if you are having a data center there, are receiving those concrete and tangible benefits. There are some great examples of ordinances that require strong participatory processes for community benefits. So municipalities can pass those as well as help private coalitions kind of negotiate independently. I'll put some links in the chat once I'm done talking, but there are some great toolkits that we've got, that some partners have that really talk about community benefits. Not as I want to be clear that we have not seen them as the win-win that I think some people want them to be, but they are a good tool for communities to have in their toolkit. Also thinking about things like limiting or banning property tax abatements to make sure that, again, everyone's kind of paying their fair share. So I have run through all of these. These are kind of a range of ways that, again, municipalities can think about, how do we make sure that we are responding to what communities are expressing to us? This is on our website, and I know Dana will be sharing these slides, and happy to chat more with folks to share these specific examples. So yeah, I'm excited now to pass it over to, I think, Jeremy, and dig in a little bit further to some of these ideas.
Yeah, Jeremy, what can folks do to kind of reduce the climate impacts of some of these data centers?
Yeah, I'm excited to get into that, and let me get my slides queued up here. Looks like I can't share while someone else is sharing.
Megan's done sharing, so you should be able to now.
I've lost my share option. Oh, there we go. And it's working now. All right. All right. Everybody should be able to see those now.
It looks great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. So I think I've got a lot of great work to share that Climate Mayors is undertaking to address data center development First, I wanted to give you a little bit of background on climate mayors. We're a bipartisan network of over 350 mayors demonstrating climate leadership through meaningful actions in their communities since 2014. We represent over 60 million Americans in 48 states and really reflect the commitment of local governments to making climate progress. So just to frame up and provide some context on why this conversation is critical right now, climate mayors, we've really been listening to our mayors as they are navigating this rapidly evolving landscape. We've heard that they need clarity on how the growth of data centers will affect their climate and sustainability goals, more direction on policy levers that are available to them. These developments are happening quickly, and they're constantly trying to play catch up with the speed and scale that these are happening. And so we're trying to help mayors and other elected officials get out in front of these challenges. And we've been developing tools and insights to help communities navigate this rapidly growing data center landscape. Really looking at recent polling as well. A lot of confidence in local leaders to provide direction and guidance on data center development, more so than in the developers themselves or in elected federal leadership. So it's really state, county, and local government officials that have the most trust right now and the most opportunity to impact change. So I wanted to talk through some of our work leading up to developing the resources we've developed at our annual meeting back in September of 2025. That's when our members really started raising these concerns. If you'd had data centers on the bingo card for climate mayors for 2026 as something that we'd be spending a significant amount of our time on, that would not be the case. But that developed over the course of late 2025. We wound up holding a roundtable of our mayors in December of 2025 to really understand their concerns. And then in partnership with Bloomberg Associates and other partners, we developed a data center resource for mayors. And now we're working on a number of other tools. We've developed an essential questions guide for local elected officials that are members of our organization. And we're partnering with some other organizations to develop an overview and best practices on local laws and regulations, and potentially developing some model laws to support that work. And one of the things that I want to make sure that you're aware of is our data centers and the climate landscape, an actionable guide for mayors. This tool is available on our resource, and we'll share it in the chat here shortly, also, so that you can access it that way. This really is a resource that focuses on how cities can influence data center development through regulation, negotiation, coalition building, and strategic leadership. It goes through 5 key policy areas and provides some high-level guidance and direction so that you can start thinking about these impacts for your communities. But before I dive into the impacts from data centers, I want to just walk through what those are. Those include energy and water. Data centers have significantly high infrastructure demands, really challenging local governments and communities' ability to, and the utilities that serve them, ability to address those energy demands. Noise is another major concern. Jobs. Data centers generate a lot of short-term construction jobs, but really limited number of permanent jobs. And there's a lot of migratory skilled trades workforce traveling to these developments. Community investment through community benefits agreements or other negotiation strategies. Land use implications from data centers. Tax revenue as a potential economic development opportunity to support local communities, and then air quality challenges associated with a lot of the um, transient generation resources, on-site generation resources that are predominantly fossil fuel or backup generation that are being pulled into some of these larger projects right now. Also wanted to touch on data center load growth, just to frame up how data centers are really challenging the overall future development of our communities. And so there's 3,000 data centers that are planned or under construction across the country right now. Factors influencing their location include, strategic location and connectivity. That can include proximity to fiber density for connections, low latency to reduce signal delays, proximity to end-use customers or clusters. Power availability and grid certainty is another key area. Making sure that they have deliverable power, available capacity, and abundant energy access. Behind the meter solutions are more flexible and open. And then proximity to existing or planned generators, predominantly fossil fueled or nuclear generators right now, but really working to expand access to clean energy generation resources is a priority for climate mayors. Economics and other incentives include, favorable tax incentives. They're looking for cheap land with limited regulatory or siting constraints, and so that's why it's important for local governments to work together to understand how they can appropriately provide opportunities to locate these data centers, but do so with the right controls that protect the community and the existing ratepayers in the region. And then lower operating costs. And lastly, regulatory and environmental factors. Data center developers are often looking for low natural disaster risk, supportive governance structures, and then, environmental regulations or oversight that enables them to develop these larger facilities. Some key data center growth metrics and projections to think about. U.S. electricity demand is projected to increase by 20 to 25% by 2030. That's an annual growth rate of 2.5 to 3%. That's significantly more than what we've seen and utilities have seen over the last 2 decades, really, where demand was predominantly flat or around the 1% range. So this represents a significant growth, a challenge for our utilities and our regulators to adapt quickly and develop the right tools to enable this growth in a smart and reasonable manner. And data centers are really projected to account for about half of this growth and use as much energy. Some use as much energy as entire cities, and in some cases, entire states. We just have an example from earlier this week in Box Elder County, Utah, where they approved the Stratos data center. The lead developer for that project is O'Leary Digital. Some of that may sound familiar. It's led by Kevin O'Leary of Shark Tank fame. But that data center is projected to use upwards of twice the entire energy use of Utah once fully built out. So some key opportunities that cities need to pay attention to. They can play a critical role in shaping where and how data centers are built, while electricity rates and utility planning are largely determined at the state level. Cities can influence infrastructure planning decisions that could affect energy prices. Cities can also set clear expectations and regulate things like water use, air quality, and noise, particularly in communities where they're already facing environmental burdens. And then cities have options to ensure that data center development delivers real local economic value. So some of the tools available under land use planning and design, and there will be a few of these examples that overlap with Meagan, but I think it's important to reiterate them. as we're all learning right now what these opportunities are. In the slide decks you'll be receiving, there are case study examples for each of these items that I'll cover, but for the interest of time today, I'm not going to cover those case studies in this slide deck. So with land use planning and design, defining data centers as their own class within zoning codes, creating zoning and overlay districts for data centers, thinking about siting criteria and overhauling permitting processes, really adopting effective design standards that address the height, the footprint, noise mitigation, the aesthetics of the facility, and then requiring conditional use permits or performance requirements. And in some cases, enacting temporary moratoria to provide the time communities need to properly plan for these data centers and have the discussions with the community that they should be having to ensure transparency. Electricity rates are another tool available to cities. Cities with municipal utilities have maybe considerably more options, and then cities with state-regulated utilities or investor-owned utilities have more limited options. But for municipal utilities, look at developing specific data center tariffs. Look at special contract options that are available. You can set requirements for a certain percentage of clean energy, upwards of 100% clean energy. Design rates to encourage load shifting during peaks, or require on-site energy storage or microgrids. And then you can look at interconnection approvals and looking at different strategies to manage the interconnection of these facilities. And then looking at demand response programs or other co-benefits for the community. On the investor-owned or state-regulated utility side, you can work on developing community benefits agreements that provide investments in local community programs, like boosting local energy efficiency programs or clean energy programs, condition land approval on meeting certain city requirements around infrastructure and sustainability. And then I really want to emphasize starting to take action and become a sophisticated participant in utility regulatory proceedings, and engaging with state legislators and public utility commissions to make sure local government needs are known and understood. There's a real opportunity here for mayors and other local elected officials to engage in utility regulatory proceedings, and become an influencing actor in that space. Water usage, a significant number of tools available to cities there as well. Conducting water availability and environmental assessments, looking at requirements for data center water use and building codes and design standards, looking at coordinating with your other regional communities on water resource needs and understanding what the impacts of these facilities will be, and then requiring reporting and other auditing of water use by these facilities. And then, on the right-hand side of the slide here, we've laid out some different options for municipal utilities and private utilities, and you can take a moment to review those once you receive the slides. And then air quality and noise. There are a number of city-led actions that you can take here, whether that's environmental screening of noise and air pollution, prohibiting on-site fossil fuel generation, or requiring clean or low emission on-site generation, restricting the use of diesel generators for backup power, and then looking at emergency requirements for backup generator operation also. Noise limits are another thing that you can manage through your zoning or other ordinances. And then looking through at some other options, looking at mandating air quality permits for industrial backup generators, prohibiting generator testing and maintenance on days with high air pollution, and a host of other opportunities. I'd also mention here too, a topic that's starting to get more attention is light pollution. With some of these larger data centers that are on the fast track for development, we're seeing 24/7 lighting for multiple shifts during construction, and then enhanced security lighting once these facilities are constructed. That can cause a lot of quality of life and health impacts for adjacent neighborhoods, as well as, the low volume hums and other noise related impacts that these communities are experiencing. And then economic and community development is the last slide I wanted to cover here. So that options to look at there are community benefits agreements, limiting tax abatements or other exemptions for these facilities at the local level, tie eligibility to particular benefits for the community or local employment outcomes. And then looking at developer contributions in alignment with city plans. Really, before these data centers agreements are struck and before discussions are started, understand what your local city goals are, understand what the potential goals are of those developers, and have a set of questions ready to probe and understand, what their commitments are, how they align with your local goals and needs, and make sure that you're getting that information in a transparent way, and making sure that you're setting up ways to track and manage that as these data centers are built and operated. And so for next steps, I want to point any local government folks that are on here and members of Climate Mayors, or invite you to become a member if you're not yet, so you can access our essential questions for mayors. We're also working on developing a coordination hub where mayors and city staff can learn more about policy levers available to them, and working on that with our partners. And if you have any questions, my email's here and I'll drop it in the chat in a few minutes, and you can reach out to me.
Thank you so
Uh,
much, Jeremy.
yeah.
Um,
You stop my sharing here and I can pass it on to Christina
yeah,
to jump into her.
great.
Excellent.
And there were a lot of questions asked in the chat while Jeremy was talking. Just so you know, I'm capturing those and we'll get into those after Christina. So Christina, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to hear more about your work.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And hopefully everyone can see my slides now.
They look great.
Okay, excellent. Well, yeah, I'm so pleased to be here speaking with everyone. Jeremy and Megan both covered so much information, much of which is you'll see sort of reflected in my materials too. This is such an enormous topic, and there's so many different angles, obviously, to approach challenges that data center development present. But I am going to be focusing on some of the experience and resources that my organization has developed looking at sort of the local level. So I am an attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center. I'll talk a little bit more about SELC in a second, but I'm based in our Charlottesville office in Virginia. I've been with SELC for almost 3 years now, and my practice largely revolves around land use, often intersecting with other topics, including energy resilience, but data centers are an enormous one. And I will just say, like Megan offered, this is not legal advice. And I also have to caveat, obviously, that I'm coming from Virginia. I'm a Virginia attorney. And so some of the policy recommendations and information that I'll be sharing is obviously informed by that context. So SELC is a nonprofit, nonpartisan environmental law firm. We work primarily in Southern Appalachia. So we cover the footprint of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia, and have numerous offices located throughout this region. We really emphasize being rooted in community and having expertise in the local context. We're lawyers, policy, and issue experts. I, for example, do a combination of litigation and policy work, and we bring to bear sort of different tools that are the best ones to approach any given challenge. So I will say that when I joined SELC almost 3 years ago, data centers were not they were not a national issue. There's sort of just a glimmer in the eye at that point. But Virginia was getting a head start. And of course, as Jeremy, some of the images that he showed noted, Virginia is the data center capital of the world. There are a few different reasons that are sort of behind that early explosion of data center development here, including the availability of fiber, the actual cables that are required to connect this infrastructure, relatively inexpensive power and land, proximity to population centers. So for some data centers, low latency, so sort of speed between dispatching information between end users and these data centers is essential. For other data center purposes, that's less essential. And then finally, financial incentives, including tax incentives, have drawn data centers to this region. And of course, over the past years, we've seen an explosion in data center development in North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, throughout the rest of the country too. I won't touch a lot on the impacts that data center development implicates because Jeremy and Meagan have really effectively covered those. But of course, those include enormous energy consumption and the implications for our grid and for energy affordability, water consumption, land consumption, and of course, impacts on communities that these facilities are located near, including air pollution from backup diesel generators or from on-site primary power. We're increasingly seeing, especially in Virginia, proposals that co-locate gas-fired power plants and data centers. And these facilities emit health-harming pollution, including fine particulate matter, and of course, noise. So the challenges are many. And over the past few years, I and my colleagues in our Virginia office have worked directly with a lot of communities, both with local officials to get in place common sense policy, including zoning changes to get a hold on data center development. We have also worked with, we've represented individuals in communities that are confronting specific data center proposals. But requests for legal assistance have just exploded. There are so many more communities that are confronting the challenges of data center development than there are SCLC staff attorneys, than there are, I'm sure, Jeremy's and Meagan's out there to actually offer assistance. And so we've thought a lot about how we can sort of scale up some of what we've learned in Virginia and elsewhere to offer to other communities. And these are just some images of data center construction and some of the transmission infrastructure that can come with the increase in power needs from these facilities too. And so earlier this year in January, my colleague, Morgan Butler, another attorney here, and I put together a resource really geared towards both local officials, including planning staff and local elected officials and residents, to help them get a sense of what they can do about data center development to ensure that any development that does happen is aligned with the community's vision for development and mitigates harms and impacts from these facilities. This resource is available on our website. I'm also happy to drop the link in the chat. But it includes 4 sections, the first of which provides more of an overview of some of those environmental and community impacts that we see with these facilities. The second, which I'll discuss in a second here, includes recommendations for addressing development through local zoning. The third provides some sample development requirements. So these are the some of the local requirements for design and operation. So requiring buffering, requiring closed loop water usage, and so forth. These are examples from around Virginia. And then lastly, which I'll also talk about in a minute here, is tips for effective public engagement. So how residents can most effectively help their local officials get their arms around data center development and understand the impacts of these facilities and make decisions that align with the community's desires. So I'm going to talk about sort of our overarching zoning policy recommendations for data centers. And both Meagan and Jeremy sort of touched on this, but I want to drill down a little bit more because this is sort of the crux of what we've learned, which is that in order for communities to get a hold on data center development and ensure that any new construction happens in a way that's compatible with the community, there needs to be opportunity for actual decision-making, review and approval by elected officials. And there needs to be opportunity for public review and engagement. So just to step back a second, generally siting decisions for data centers, as others have mentioned, happen at the local level. And what you'll see is that your zoning ordinance, if you have zoning, will divide the locality into different districts that are geared towards different sort of broad categories of uses. So you'll have residential districts, agricultural districts, commercial districts, industrial districts, and so forth. In each of those districts, you'll see a list of uses that are permitted. So an apartment building, an office, a data center, for example. And some of those uses will be permitted by right. What this generally means is that developers are free to build this land use so long as it complies with those basic design requirements, so long as it complies with height requirements, any sort of regulations on setbacks from the street, and so forth. So long as they comply with those, there's no opportunity for local officials to decide not to approve it. And there's no opportunity for the public generally to review or provide comment. And that's a problem because data centers are a uniquely impactful land use. They're impactful in isolation, individual facilities, but they're also especially impactful in the aggregate. And it is generally, as a land use attorney, it's really quite rare to see a land use that's proliferating so quickly, both as sort of a combination of the demand for computing power and because of the deep pockets of the folks who are building these. And so those aggregate impacts are really enormous. Ideally, what you would see is sort of the requirement for legislative approval for any new facility. So others have mentioned this might go by the name of a conditional use permit or a special use permit or a special exception. And at least in Virginia, what this requires is that the proposal has to be advertised to the public. It needs to go before public hearings where the public can come and comment. And then it'll make its way to the local elected officials. So your Board of Supervisors, your county, Virginia, or your city council for vote. And that local governing body could decide to approve or deny. And in Virginia, they could also decide to place additional conditions on the facility. So if they take a look at it and they've determined that even if it complies with sort of those baseline design requirements, it may have sort of outsized noise impacts or light pollution or air pollution impacts, they can put some additional sort of guardrails on it, whether that's requiring, downlighting or additional buffering, or setting, sort of unique parameters around when those backup generators are allowed to be tested. So a really important opportunity to decide, one, do we want and need a data center, a new data center at all? But two, if we decide that we're okay with some development, does this project need additional tailoring to make it compatible with the community? So that decision point and opportunity for public review is just so critical. And ideally, communities with zoning would adopt this into their zoning ordinance if they're open to some data center development. I will note some folks I saw in the chat were flagging what do we do if we don't have zoning? Um, I will say this is sort of a novel area, but I have seen some communities in North Carolina and Tennessee that don't have zoning try to make use of their police power to adopt moratoria. I don't have a great sense of how effective those approaches are, but I think we are seeing more creativity. And then I also want to talk a bit about effective public engagement. So generally, local elected officials, if they have put in place sort of a decision point, they are interested in what their constituents have to say. They're interested in what they want. And ideally, a community can help make it easy for their local elected officials to make the decision that they would like by really effectively communicating how they feel about data centers, what information we need to know about projects. There are a few different sort of key tips that we've identified over the years working with specific communities. This is sort of our quick and dirty roadmap to effective community organizing and public engagement. So at the outset, when a new data center proposal comes to your locality, you'll want to obtain a copy of the proposal and study it. You can do this by reaching out to your local planning department and requesting a copy, including any supporting documents. And often you can, ask follow-up questions and get a better sense of what you're looking at. These are folks who, they work for you. You'll want to know the rules of the process. So you'll want to get a sense of what the requirements are for advertisement of applications. So, how far in advance of a public hearing the locality is required to advertise the proposal and the hearing itself, and where you can find it to study it. You'll want to get a sense of what's required at the public hearings, the timing of decisions from local officials, rules around deferrals or postponements, and so forth. So understanding the rules, which are set out, sometimes in your local zoning ordinance, sometimes informed by your state code, and then also sometimes sort of rules that are separately set out by the local governing body. You can create a communications hub. We've seen communities really effectively use, for example, Facebook pages or newsletters to ensure that as they learn more information about a proposal, it's being disseminated to the community. You can also host a community information meeting. So this is sort of you might rent a space to host community members who are concerned about this project, share out information that you've learned about it, and identify additional information that you need. You might consider inviting the applicant itself to come speak and offer an opportunity for community members to ask questions of them. And we've found that these community meetings can be quite helpful because the community sets the agenda rather than the applicant itself when it's hosting its own information meeting or the locality. So if there are topics that are really important to the community to understand, whether it's water use or air pollution or so forth, you'll get a chance to actually talk about those. You'll want to broaden your reach, so ensure that local officials understand that people across your county, for example, not just in the district where the project is proposed to be located, and not just the folks who live directly next to it, that the officials understand that people care about this broadly. They're much more likely to listen and to take care in how they approach a proposal if they get the sense that a broad coalition of people care about this. You want to research the applicant, including their past projects, to the extent available. And then you also want to help decision makers understand the impacts. So you'll want to ask, is this project consistent with your comprehensive plan that lays out the vision for development? Are there valuable community or natural resources located on site or nearby? How is this facility providing power? Is it using on-site power, backup generators? You want to ask about air quality impacts if there are backup generators or on-site power. You want to ask about water use and the source of water and so forth. And then lastly, and very, very importantly, you'll want to promote really strong turnout. It is way easier for your local officials to make a decision that aligns with your ideas and preferences if they see a sea of people all speaking in unison. So I will just conclude there. There's so much to say, but these are sort of some of what we've learned over the past years is most effective.
There is so much to say. I really appreciate that presentation as well as the others, as well as the very active chat that I have been pulling some questions from. I think first I might call on Meagan. You shared a few resources in the chat, particularly in response, and you also spoke to it, Christina, the question about, folks are maybe in a county that doesn't have the opportunity to create ordinances, et cetera. Again, if you want to echo some of that advice you put in the chat, Meagan, if there's anything you'd want to add there just to get it said out loud, or advice for those communities that are not in a kind of a traditional city setting.
Yeah, great. Well, I can get started, and Christina, I'd love to hear your ideas as well. Um, unfortunately, in our region, without zoning, oftentimes that is like the main stamp of approval that a municipal group has on any sort of development. And so, if a municipality doesn't have zoning, they're really kind of really limited in terms of what decision-making power they have. That's unfortunate. I'm not saying that that's right. It's just like the reality. So, if you do live in an area that you can advocate for zoning, it can always help make sure that in the future, decisions are made based off community voice. It's a long process. It's not a clear-cut process, but it's something that your community can really work toward in the long run. We also know, and I saw somebody else mention this, that in one of our states, West Virginia, even if you have zoning, the state took away power to use the zoning to make decisions, right? And so the good news is that there are other avenues that communities can get involved in, other levers that they can think about pressing. Maybe that looks like community benefits. Maybe that looks like advocating really hard at the state permitting level, because all data centers, no matter the specifics of how they will be built, are all going to require a pretty large number of state permits. Some of those have kind of lots of opportunities to get involved and press on those, both as residents as well as potentially your municipality. And so thinking about like those other vulnerabilities that you can press on if you don't have zoning at your municipal level or your county level, can be a good option to really focus in on. Christina, what other ideas are coming up for you?
Yeah, I would completely echo what you've said. Yeah, the context for West Virginia is really challenging. And you mentioned, focusing in on some of these other permitting junctures, including for air quality or water quality, or water use permitting, can be really, really important in absence of that sort of local land use siting checkpoint. For localities that don't have zoning, I mentioned that there are some counties and other states that have been thinking about whether they can use other powers, including their local police power, to put sort of at least a temporary check on data center development. And I will just return to those. One of those is Clay County in North Carolina, where they, I believe, have adopted or are attempting to adopt a moratorium, just using their police power. And then Hawkins County, Tennessee, has adopted a ban under the County Powers Act, which I understand to be state legislation that is also police power based. My understanding is that the Hawkins County ban has been challenged. So I think we're going to see over the coming years whether this is a viable strategy, but sort of the unfortunate conclusion is ideally localities would advocate for adopting zoning in some form or another, because that is an immensely powerful tool for communities and for local officials.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll just say is the data centers are not in isolation of all of the future conversations we can have as a community. You know, they're an opportunity for us to build long term. And we see this again and again. The more times that communities are getting together and saying what they want, how they want to be treated by billionaires who are making money off of their resources, you know, what they deserve as a community and what the baseline for respect for their community looks like. Those are seeds that, you know, do have long-term productive value. And so I want to just kind of say that if you know, so to Christina's point, some of the solutions are not ready yet in your community, but this is not the last company that is going to want to make money off the land and workers in your community. So what maybe could we have for the next time? And the more pre-work is done, also the less loaded and challenging it can be if it's done outside of one of these really intense situations that, and just really saying, you know, as a community, these are the standards and how we would like to be treated. A lot of the things that apply to data centers apply to other industries or potential development as well. So just to really underscore the just the long game. And Jeremy, I saw you were off mute, so I wanted to make sure I didn't miss you.
Yeah, I was just going to offer up another example from Johnson County, Iowa, where they passed a temporary moratorium earlier this year through November to give them ample time to consider ways that they can address data center development. There's a lot of active activity in eastern Iowa for data center development right now. Those counties do have zoning power to some degree, so they are passing and updating ordinances associated with that. And Lynn County recently passed some fairly uh, proactive regulations that were for a Google data center that was looking to locate in that county. Unfortunately, once that was adopted after a long effort to cooperate with Google and develop those together. Google's working now with an adjacent town to annex that territory with potentially less restrictions. The result of that remains to be seen. But I'd also echo the soft power opportunities of bringing together county commissions across multiple adjacent counties to coordinate and develop a united front and strategy. So oftentimes, you know, these counties are competing against one another to some degree to attract some of these development opportunities. But I think in the interest of making sure that you're protecting your communities and developing pathways that are result in improved quality of life or maintaining quality of life for community members, that there's a real opportunity there to start connecting these commissioners together and having these conversations and developing a united strategy.
That's great. There's just on the I'm gonna pull a couple zoning questions that I pulled out of the Minty. Just a quick kind of procedure note. We did get a question in the chat as to whether or not the links shared in the chat would be shared. We do pull all the links from the chat and put them in the follow-up email, but you can go to the top right of your chat and see the three little dots that says more, and also save the chat for your own use if you are not aware of that option. So this is a question about, this was an interesting one to me. Can an ordinance at the county level regulating data centers preempt a city ordinance that is more lenient? So I don't know. I'm going to drop that question in the chat so folks, y'all can see it because I'm a visual person. I like to see questions that I'm trying to answer. I just curious. It seemed like a funny little loophole. So if anybody has any insight into that, and if not, that's okay.
I will just pop in to say I do not know, in part because Virginia is somewhat anomalous in that our counties and cities do not overlap jurisdictionally. They're totally separate entities with their own ordinances. But I would be curious if Meagan or Jeremy have any insight.
I'd also add that I do not know because we're in a similar situation here in Iowa.
I will throw out, and again, I am not a lawyer. I have no legal training. This is not legal advice. I believe that in situations like this, um, the city will take priority over the county. That could be not 100% accurate, could be different situations if you're like a third class city versus township versus all of the different things. Um, but generally then if you don't have zoning, it goes to the county level. So I believe that that is what I've heard. But again, please reach out and we can try and confirm uh, that question.
Right. And there is a note from Kevin Riley from Launa. Hi, Kevin. In the chat that gets right at the next question we had, which are people are really hungry for responsible models, examples of best practices in action. There was a number of questions that have been shared. So if y'all have a couple of favorite ones or sources for learning more about those, it seems like there's a big need for it. And I think all of your material, does Jeremy and Christina, I think your materials have some concrete examples, like case studies, right? Yeah. So some of those can be found in the materials that will be shared, but any kind of sort of cliff notes for that question on who's doing it well? Are there examples that folks should take a look at? And in particular, there's one about CBAs, but I think
I included a couple examples that will be in the slides that are shared out. One particular data center development I would point folks towards is one developed by the Forest County Potawatomi community. They're building a data center and doing that really in a way to preserve and protect the social and environmental needs and concerns of their community, but also create an economic development opportunity there. And it's called the Milwaukee Internet Exchange. And I'll provide some details about that in the chat. But they're really focusing on, high efficiency, both from an energy and water standpoint, clean energy opportunities there as well.
that's fantastic. Yeah, I think that's definitely something folks are really looking for. So keep an eye out for those. Let's see. Um,
Dana,
Go
can I
ahead.
just add
Yeah,
something about community benefits real quick?
absolutely.
Because I've seen a lot of questions around, are there strong community benefit examples? I think there are some great templates. I see folks kind of mentioning the NAACP, which is great. Young Gifted Green just came out with a great community benefit ordinance hub yesterday, so check that out as well. I just really want to encourage folks that, we do a lot of CBA work, and there's kind of two pieces of it that can lead to some really big red flags. Well, there's a lot of pieces that can lead to red flags, but kind of two buckets of it. One being kind of what is in the end document, right? Are communities getting the benefits and protections that they need, deserve, that fit with the economic scope of the project, et cetera? That's really important. Folks have a lot of ideas and concerns there. Even more important, almost always, is the process by which that benefit agreement is written and created. And so there are lots of lessons that we can learn from CBAs that have been negotiated across the country for other sorts of developments that we can learn, what was the good process that had the right people at the table, that had meaningful decision-making power, and then really led to strong transparency back with the broader community. And so as we're thinking about community benefit agreements and ordinance processes, I think that's a really important piece to think about is how can we make sure that the process that we get to the end document is one that really makes sure that community is centered and part of those conversations. So even though we haven't seen a ton of like specific CBAs with data centers yet, because again, we're all running at 800 miles an hour with this thing. There is so much that we can learn and draw from in terms of what is the process that creates strong, teethy, community-driven agreements.
Thank you so much. A few questions about non-disclosure agreements as well as transparency, how to encourage transparency. And I know, Christina, y'all have definitely some tools in your piece about kind of creating points in the process to require transparency, but I don't know if, any of our speakers, I know those the NDAs that get signed, all that is a big concern. So if folks have any kind of big picture thoughts about those to address that.
I will just offer sort of a broad overarching thought on NDAs. They're really challenging to navigate around, and often they're used to sort of obscure really basic fundamental information about a project, including, how much water it might use, or how much power it may require. I think what communities should be thinking about is expressing a strong preference to their local elected officials early before any new proposal comes to town, against this kind of secrecy, and trying to ensure that their local elected officials who have discretion to enter into these NDAs or not really understand that preference against this kind of secrecy. But it is a really challenging device that we're seeing used way more often across the country.
Mhm. Great. Very helpful. If any of your other speakers have any um insight into that. There's a question here. Is there a list of places with state or local moratoriums on data centers or more information on moratoriums? So I know, Meagan, you all have been doing some digging into moratoriums as an option, especially for smaller communities that just need a minute to kind of it's as the person in the chat earlier who I think already had to leave, they found out 2 days ago about this data center. They have a week to decide. That is not a reasonable timeline, probably, to make community decisions about one of the largest pieces of infrastructure that will ever be built in that community. So anyway, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to moratoriums or any of or if there's any tracking of them that Meagan, or any kind of places to start. And Jeremy, Christina, same question.
Yeah, these are great options to, again, just kind of take a breath, give municipalities the time that they deserve to make these big decisions and get their processes in place. Not always an option in every state, depending on state law. So like PA and West Virginia, it's going to look different than Ohio in our 3 states. At a state level, I do know that there are multiple states that are proposing legislation to do like a state level moratorium to give everybody a pause. I will put a link to a kind of state level legislation tracker that I know of. I'm sure there's some other great ones, and there might be some information there.
Great. And Jeremy, thanks for that link in the chat. It does look like there is that looks like a moratorium tracker, or some kind of article about it.
Yeah, so that's a state moratorium, or at least proposed legislation for moratoriums from the Good Jobs First organization. It does not get into county or local government moratoriums, but that data has been a little more sparse and hard to find, and something that I'm looking to pull together as well. So potentially an opportunity for some additional work for some of our organizations.
I did get emailed one for Albany, Ohio, that was passed recently, a little village near Columbus, I believe. Anyway, if anyone wants to see that, I have that fresh in my inbox. One of the questions that I think is really interesting are a few non-negotiables for CBAs, which, is, I think, both a difficult question to ask, but maybe a fun one to pose to our speakers, for you. There's been so much information shared on this webinar. The questions are so big. Are there a few things that maybe each of you would highlight that would be on your top 3 list? Maybe the number is flexible, that you would kind of most want to see as far as protections or ordinances, etc. Jeremy, you're off mute. Can I call on you first?
Yeah, top 3, I'd say energy and water benchmarking requirements, data sharing requirements, both planned energy use and water use versus actual once the facility is built is an important piece. I think, as everyone's noted, transparency and the public engagement component, really putting that front and center at the beginning of these discussions, even before being approached by a data center developer. It's really important for these communities to understand what are the needs of the community, what are the concerns of the community, and making sure that that's getting worked into the questions that the elected officials are asking data center developers. And then, lastly, I think creativity in community benefits agreements for funding that supports existing local programs, whether that's, low income weatherization, energy efficiency, clean energy deployment in the community through virtual power plants or other solutions, really looking at ways that you can achieve the capacity that the data center needs by investing in the community so that there's a mutual benefit to both the community and the developers.
Great. Megan, do you have a top wish list?
Everything Jeremy just said. The only thing I would add is just to, again, really make sure that communities have multiple opportunities before, during, after, to make sure that their concerns are being addressed and that their needs are being met, and that they are really the ones driving decisions that are going to impact the future of that community. Plus everything Jeremy said.
Christina.
Nothing new from me. I'll just, defer to the wise words of Jeremy and Megan.
I love it. One of the questions I also ask a lot are what are things that you have learned maybe the hard way or that you've seen communities learn the hard way that you wish wish they had known for the start? Are there any kind of top level sort of learnings that you've seen that you want to maybe lift up when we look at these processes I know we've been, like Megan said, running at a sprint. So, but yeah, any top learnings that or for us?
I can share one that's kind of a frustrating learning that we're helping a lot of communities kind of process through, and that is elected officials making decisions in ways that feel shady, potentially illegal, definitely not necessarily following the intent of Sunshine Act laws, and that being unfortunately really common. And rightfully so, really makes people really upset and angry that these decisions are being made like that. And unfortunately, there are ways that communities can uh, kind of potentially bring some legal action or just organizing attention to this. And elected officials have a lot of leeway to make decisions that folks don't like, and often decisions in the way that folks don't want the process. And so, when we're thinking about how can I, as this hypothetical community member who's like really volunteering a lot of my time and energy and effort on top of maybe working a job or two, having a family, having lots of other things, where do I spend my time in the ways that's going to make the biggest impact on this facility? And the transparency and Sunshine Act violations, although they are important, oftentimes elected officials can then kind of do the process the right way and make the exact same decision. And so when we think about, again, how can we help make sure that grassroots organizing time is being spent in ways that acknowledge that they're real human beings and this is not their job. And I'm sure many of you can relate to spending so much time in this space that you're giving to your community. It's just kind of a crummy place to be, right? To have your elected officials make decisions in processes that don't feel good and don't feel including of community voice. But unfortunately, again, they can kind of make those same decisions again, just walking through the process maybe slightly differently. And so I think a lesson a lot of communities are learning of like, this is frustrating, and how can we make sure that we're not getting stuck being really frustrated with this process, but also then look toward other ways that we can impact what's happening in the future.
Christina or Megan, or Christina or Jeremy? Sorry.
Yeah, I think that what Megan said is really on point. I mean, my sort of primary observation is that communities that have, historically allowed data center development by right without that legislative decision point, um, you know, feeling a lot of heartburn after the fact, and finding that it's hard, once you've already seen a proliferation of development, to go in and change things. So to the extent that any localities have not already experienced that influx of data center development, try to get that that decision juncture in place early is incredibly valuable. I also, sort of a global observation, I think that in absence of hearing from their constituents that they don't necessarily want data center development, the primary, feel motivation or feeling of obligation for local officials is often that they need to do whatever possible to drive economic development and increase tax revenue. And it is really hard to resist data centers because they don't require generally the provision of other public services, whether that's roads or schools or housing. And because the computer equipment inside of these facilities is so valuable, you can get a lot of personal property tax from it. And it is just so essential that community members articulate early and often, and with a broad coalition of folks across, across the locality, that they don't necessarily need to see every project approved or uniformly. It just is so much easier for local officials to make decisions that feel aligned with community desires if they're seeing a lot of people, articulating these perspectives clearly and loudly and often.
Jeremy, anything to add? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll echo Meagan and Christina's comments and just add on top of that, I think the siting component of data centers is really important to manage. We're seeing a lot of downside impacts from data centers that were sited adjacent to residential neighborhoods with significant health and quality of life impacts. So really thinking through that and talking through that with your local elected officials, making sure that, prime property in the county or in the community is not being used for data centers, and that you're locating them correctly next to uses that are at least somewhat aligned, and not creating this disproportional boundary between homes and these large facilities. Another one I'd throw out there is starting to have conversations and thinking about what to do with these data centers after their useful life. The life of these data centers is, it takes 5 years to build out a data center complex, a large data center complex. Typically, life of these facilities is probably 15 years, and then it's probably going to be cheaper for those data center developers and operators to build a new one elsewhere with the most current technology. And then it's going to be like the old Walmart stores of the past, where communities have to rethink how they're going to use these facilities, and how can they repurpose them into other uses. So starting those conversations now, and especially where data centers have been more prevalent for longer, and thinking about how to retool these facilities for community benefit is an important thing to start thinking about.
I just want to see, there was a question from Padmini in the chat, which is a good one. And the question was, are all data centers bad? Is this just about hyperscaling centers? And so our last webinar talked a lot about the difference between traditional data centers, which are much smaller, and the hyperscale data centers, which use generative AI. The technology required in AI creates a lot more heat. It takes a lot more power, and then because it's creating more heat, it takes more water to cool it. So and they're also much larger because the generative AI technology needs to talk to each other. It works best in large campuses, and so it's quite different than what we know as traditional data centers. But what I want to say is, for my money, I don't even care if you want it or you don't want it. What I care about is these are the richest companies in the history of the world, and they need us to make their money, and we deserve a fair share. So I just want to say, like, I would love this for every state, but Eli Lilly is the drug manufacturing company. This is based in Indiana. It's one of the largest companies in the state. It has an enormous footprint, enormous power in the state, and it is a fraction the size of Microsoft, right? And so these companies have it. The vast majority of their expenses, about like 60-70% of the expense of building a data center is just in the chips. It's a very small percentage of the actual total money that goes into the land purchasing, into the facility building itself. Most of the money is in the chips, is in the technology. And so they have it. They can treat communities fairly. It is possible for them to do that. And the other thing I'll say is if we don't push back and ask them, then they won't. They're not going to. Why would they? If they can get away with it, wouldn't they try to? So it's Anyway, so my next slide, and I was about to unshare, but so it's somewhat of a myth to say, and not to call you out, but that if you use a phone, you need hyperscale AI data centers. We do need the traditional data centers, but those tend to be smaller, to have less electronic footprint, and so there really are two different beasts. It's a lot of what we see as the new data centers and that big rush for build out is really about the generative AI component, which is certainly growing and a big part of our technology and what's coming next. So I'm not seeing that, I don't have my head under a rock about that, but just to say, so I just wanted to kind of highlight the answer to that question, which is that they are a different kettle of fish. And I think there maybe are a lot of communities that have had the traditional data centers around and they were fairly good neighbors. And the new hyperscale are just many, many, many times the size, and electricity, water, noise impact. So it's just different. So if folks want to see that full slide deck we have, it talks a lot about sort of the specific hyperscale data centers, and that was what I presented in our Data Center 101 webinar. So we are near the end of our hour. There's a question from Paige about the use of, I have no idea how much was being used for surveillance. That is a new one for me. So if anybody has, I know there's a lot of experts on this call. I'm so grateful for all of our partners who were sharing resources and answers to the question in the chat, and really welcome that kind of input, because there are so many experts and so many folks coming to these calls that have so much knowledge. Any last thoughts, things to highlight from our wonderful speakers? All right, just wanted to give you all one last chance. Thanks again for our speakers. We can do a little silent round of applause for those if people are able to do the react button. There you go. Somebody's got the react button. That's always fun. So we will be reconvening next month as part of this series. Oh, you know what we forgot to share, Liam? We do have a little data center clips list that we do. We send out about 3 times a month. We'll send out some clips with some findings. So to sign up for those data center clips, which is like news articles, and as resources come out, you can fill out that form. And so that you'll get an email a couple times a month that's just kind of about what has crossed our inboxes here at ReImagine about data centers. So thank you all so much. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions. They were wonderful questions, and we'll share those out afterwards. So thank you all.